A few months ago, I moved into a new apartment with a roommate I found online. His name was Kevin. He seemed like a quiet, normal guy when we first met. The rent was cheap and I didn't have many other options, so I took the room. At first, everything seemed fine. Kevin worked odd hours and kept to himself, which was perfect for me since I valued my privacy. We'd occasionally chat in passing, but that was about it. One night, I came home late from work and noticed something odd. Kevin's door, which was usually shut, was slightly open. The lights were off, but I could hear faint mumbling coming from inside. I called out, "Kevin, you okay?" The mumbling stopped immediately. A few seconds later, the door creaked shut. I figured he might have been talking to someone on the phone or just didn't want to be disturbed. It was weird, but I didn't think much of it. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. I'd come home to find drawers in the kitchen open or items in the fridge moved around. Once, I even found one of my shirts in the bathroom sink, soaked. Kevin always denied knowing anything about it. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. They were slow and deliberate. I thought it was Kevin. But then I realized something. His door was directly across from mine, and I hadn't heard it open. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but after a few moments, they faded away. The next morning, I asked Kevin if he'd been walking around during the night. He gave me a strange look and said he'd been at work all night. I didn't know what to believe, but I started locking my bedroom door after that. The breaking point came a week later. It was a Friday night, and Kevin was home for once. I decided to try and break the ice with him, so I invited him to watch a movie in the living room. He agreed, but acted distant the entire time. Halfway through the movie, Kevin suddenly stood up and said he needed to grab something from his room. He didn't come back. After waiting for about 20 minutes, I went to check on him. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I turned the knob, but it was locked. "Kevin?" I called out. No response. As I turned to head back to my room, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Kevin was standing in the hallway, staring at me. But something was off. He was standing completely still, and his eyes looked vacant. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked back into his room, shutting the door behind him. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard shuffling sounds coming from the hallway. I listened closely and realized they were coming from my closet. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. As I approached the closet, the shuffling stopped. My hand trembled as I opened the door. Inside, there was nothing but my clothes. I closed the door and got back into bed, but as soon as I turned off the light, I heard it again, shuffling, followed by faint breathing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I confronted Kevin and told him I couldn't live there anymore. He didn't seem surprised. As I packed my things, I noticed something odd in the corner of his room, a pile of notebooks. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through one. It was filled with detailed entries about me, what time I left for work, what I ate, even the nights I woke up to those footsteps. The last entry read, "Soon, ooh, he'll understand." I left that day without looking back. I don't know what Kevin's plan was, but I'm grateful I didn't stick around to find out. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint shuffling sounds in my new apartment. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I'm not so sure. A few years ago, I moved to the city for a new job and found an apartment with a roommate named Chris. He seemed normal enough when we first met, a bit reserved, but polite. I was just relieved to have found a decent place with affordable rent. At first, everything was fine. Chris worked odd hours and spent a lot of time in his room, so I barely saw him. I liked the privacy. But over time, I started noticing small, unsettling things. It began with my stuff getting misplaced. Keys, phone charger, even clothes. They'd always show up somewhere else, but it didn't feel like absent-mindedness. One night, I came home to find Chris sitting on the couch in the dark, staring at the blank TV screen. I greeted him, but he didn't respond. When I tried again, he turned his head slightly, mumbled something I couldn't make out, and walked back to his room. The whole interaction left me on edge. A few nights later, I woke up to a sound outside my room, like someone was pacing. I figured it was Chris, but when I listened closer, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I froze, waiting to hear them move away, but instead, I heard the faint sound of breathing. I was too scared to open the door, so I just sat there, heart racing, until the breathing eventually stopped. The next morning, Chris acted like nothing happened. The final straw came a week later when I got home earlier than usual. Chris wasn't in the living room, but his door was slightly open and I could see him sitting at his desk. He was scribbling something furiously in a notebook, muttering to himself. I was about to knock when I noticed my name written all over the pages. It wasn't sentences, just my name repeated over and over again. That night, I decided to confront Chris. I waited until I heard him go to the bathroom, then snuck into his room to look at the notebooks. What I found made my stomach drop. There were several of them, all filled with strange, obsessive notes about me. What time I left for work, what I ate, conversations we'd had. Some of the entries mentioned things I'd never even told him, like personal details from my past. The most recent entry was the worst. Tonight's the night. He won't understand at first, but he will soon. I didn't know what he meant, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I packed a bag as quietly as I could, planning to leave and find a hotel for the night. As I was zipping my bag, I heard Chris's voice from behind me. "Going somewhere?" I turned and saw him standing in the doorway, holding the kitchen knife. His eyes were wide, almost unblinking. "What's going on, Chris?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, stepping closer. "But it's okay. Now you'll understand." I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I grabbed my bag and shoved past him, running out of the apartment. I didn't stop until I was a few blocks away, where I called the police. When they arrived, Chris was gone. They searched the apartment and found more notebooks, along with other disturbing items, a collection of photos of me, some taken while I was asleep. I moved out the next day, breaking the lease and leaving everything behind. I haven't heard from Chris since, but sometimes I still feel like someone's watching me. And on nights when I hear faint footsteps outside my door, I wonder if he ever really left. Last year, I moved into an apartment with two roommates, Mike and Lisa. They were friendly and easygoing, and we got along well. The dynamic changed when Mike suddenly announced he was moving out to take a job in another city. It was unexpected, but Lisa quickly found someone to take his place, a guy named Darren. Darren moved in a week later. He was quiet but polite, the kind of person you didn't notice much. At first, everything seemed fine. He kept to himself, spent most of his time in his room, and rarely joined Lisa and me in the living room. About a month after Darren moved in, I started noticing odd things. I'd leave my bedroom door closed and come back to find it slightly open. One night, I caught Darren staring at me while I was watching TV. When I asked if he needed something, he just shook his head and walked away without saying a word. Lisa said she hadn't noticed anything strange, but she admitted she didn't interact with Darren much. "He's just different," she said. One night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from the hallway. It sounded like scratching, faint but persistent. I opened my door and found Darren standing in the dark, facing Lisa's room. His hand was against her door, his nails lightly scraping the wood. When I called out to him, he jumped and quickly walked back to his room without saying a word. The next morning, I told Lisa what I'd seen, but she brushed it off, saying Darren was probably sleepwalking. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't push it. The situation escalated about a week later. Lisa was out of town visiting family, leaving Darren and me alone in the apartment. I tried to avoid him as much as possible, but late that night I heard a loud thud from the kitchen. I went to check it out and found Darren sitting at the table, staring at a notebook. He didn't acknowledge me, so I cautiously approached and glanced at the pages. It was full of detailed entries about me and Lisa, our schedules, conversations, even things he couldn't have known unless he'd been eavesdropping. One page had a crude map of the apartment, with Lisa's and my rooms marked. Beneath it, he had written, "Step 1. Separate." I backed away, trying not to make a sound, but Darren suddenly turned to look at me. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice calm but icy. I bolted back to my room, locked the door, and called the police. While I was on the phone, I heard Darren's footsteps approaching. He jiggled the doorknob and then started knocking, softly at first, but growing louder. By the time the police arrived, Darren was gone. They found his notebooks and other disturbing items in his room, including a collection of small personal things he had stolen from Lisa and me. Jewelry, photos, even a toothbrush. Lisa and I both moved out within a week, leaving the apartment and everything associated with it behind. I don't know what Darren's ultimate plan was, but I'm certain it wasn't anything good. To this day, I double-check every lock and always keep a weapon nearby just in case.